Have you ever thought about religion, not just as a matter of personal faith, but as a piece of massive civilizational software? Because historically, organized religion actually functioned as the world's very first global operating system. We're talking about a wildly complex network of algorithms, ledgers, and firewalls, all designed to manage human behavior, time, and even commerce. So in this explainer, we're going to look under the hood of this ancient technology and perform a full forensic audit on its code.
Okay, let's dive into this architectural audit. We will start with the temporal code, move right into the linguistic key, examine the financial ledger, unpack the internal OS, and finally look at the sublimation protocol.
Section 1. The temporal code, hacking the doomsday calendar.
So we're starting with a system component called chronography. Early Christian figures, guys like Julius Africanus and Hippolytus, were absolutely obsessed with calculating the exact date of creation. And you might be wondering why. Well, because they believed the world had a strict, hard-coded 6,000-year lifespan. Based on their math, which put creation somewhere around 5500 BC, the Second Coming, and literally the end of the world, was slated to hit right around the year AD 500. As you can imagine, as that deadline got closer, the entire system was under immense millennial pressure. Every chronographer who came after them, from Penodorus to Annianus, had to grapple with this giant ticking clock.
Now here's the brilliant part about how they actually solved it. The Byzantine standard eventually settled on a creation date of 5509 BC. By adjusting that start date, this standard effectively acted as a chronological safety valve. It pushed the dreaded 6,000-year doomsday mark far past any imminent future, which allowed society to completely escape the eschatological math established by Africanus. They literally rewrote the system clock to keep the operating system running smoothly without causing mass panic. How genius is that?
Section 2. The linguistic key. The 6 prophetic keys. All right, transitioning now into the linguistic code of the church, specifically looking at the Greek Septuagint. What's absolutely fascinating here is how a single word can shift from just being a regular job description into a massive cosmic title. Christos is the Greek translation of the Hebrew word Mashiach, or anointed one. Typically, this was just a functional term for a priest or a king, but New Testament authors derived their specific divine definition of Christ from just 6, literally only 6, very specific Old Testament occurrences where the term was elevated to a singular prophetic title looking forward to a savior.
These specific verses didn't just predict a historical figure, They actually created the divine scaffolding for the entire New Testament reality, particularly the Catholic Mass. Think about it. 1 Samuel's "Walk before my Christ" sets the stage for the ministerial priesthood. Psalm 20, predicting the Lord has saved his Christ, lays the direct groundwork for the resurrection. And it goes on, with Daniel and Amos setting up the incarnation and the real presence. This is a masterclass in typology, where the Old Testament acts as the shadow and the New Testament is the resulting substance.
Section 3. The financial ledger. Monks who invented modern finance.
So we are shifting the architecture now from theology to commerce. And the absolutely crucial point here is that the Catholic Church had extremely strict laws against usury. Lending money at interest was considered a mortal sin. But Venice's entire economy was built on investment and return. To fix this pretty massive bug in the system, merchants had to develop financial language as a kind of moral negotiation. They needed a vocabulary that described profit without officially calling it interest. Take the word credit, for example. It comes from the Latin credere, meaning to believe or to trust. It's a financial term, sure, but it carries a deeply theological resonance.
And get this, it gets incredibly ironic historically. On one side, we have the Franciscan friars, an order founded on principles of radical poverty. On the other side, the literal invention of capitalism. So how on earth do they connect? Well, it was actually a Franciscan friar, Fra Luca Pacioli, who codified double-entry bookkeeping way back in 1494. By engaging with commercial ethics, the Franciscans inadvertently engineered the linguistic framework of modern capitalism. They essentially built a theological workaround that allowed the Western world to balance its ledgers without losing its soul.
Section 4. The internal OS. Public law versus private mercy.
This is where we look at exactly how the Church managed human nature. The framework essentially operates on 2 totally different tracks. On the front end, you have the public law, the rigid moral ledger that points toward an ideal standard. But on the back end, you have the confessional reality, also known as the internal forum.
While the public law maintains these super strict boundaries, the sacrament of reconciliation functions essentially as a frictionless system restore, built on infinite mercy. It's perfectly designed to manage the reality that human beings are, well, fundamentally flawed and will inevitably crash the system from time to time.
Let's look at how this actually played out historically. Back in medieval times, the church often prioritized the purity of its property rights over consistent moral discipline. For instance, a married priest was viewed as a major structural threat. Why? Because his family created a competing legal contract for church property. That was dealt with incredibly harshly in public. Meanwhile, private moral failings were handled quietly in the confessional. The confessional acted as a true sanctuary, while public enforcement was often just a tool to consolidate institutional power.
Which brings us perfectly to how this OS handles modern issues today, like the rejection of LGBTQ+ individuals at religious camps. When staff members use religious rules to exclude or hurt people, they are essentially acting as rogue nodes, operating completely outside the master code of charity. As this quote captures so perfectly, if a stranger in a fake police uniform tells you that you're under arrest for having brown eyes, you don't go to jail. You realize the guy is a fraud. If someone uses a spiritual fake ID to condemn you, you don't accept the verdict. You recognize that the local administrator is acting with unauthorized privileges.
So this builds a really perfect framework for forensic skepticism. If you ever feel excluded by an institution, just run an audit on it. You absolutely must separate the true divine protocol, the root directory, from human system errors. The true protocol is always validated by peace and offers a frictionless reset. The rogue node? That's driven by fear. It uses firewalls to block access and attempts an unauthorized override of your soul. Understanding this difference is absolutely crucial to maintaining your own system integrity.
Finally, Section 5, the Sublimation Protocol. Transmuting rejection into greatness.
So, how do marginalized individuals successfully bypass these local rogue nodes? The core concept we need to talk about here is sublimation. Think of it as a psychological and spiritual gearbox. It takes raw, restricted energy, whether that's from rejection, desire, or identity, and forcefully shifts it into high-utility output. According to historical researchers like J.D. Unwin, high moral standards aren't meant to be a fence to just keep you out. They are actually designed as a hydroelectric turbine meant to pressurize human energy, transmuting it into literally cathedral-building greatness.
Okay, so how do you actually run this protocol on a daily basis? Well, here's the technical workflow. Step 1 is the system boot, where you authenticate your value directly with the source in the internal forum. Step 2 is the forensic audit, identifying exactly where you are leaking emotional energy to people who hurt you. Step 3 is the physical check, basically applying daily discipline. And finally, Step 4 is the ledger close, nullifying the false verdicts of the day. Doing this ensures your energy is compressed into pure creative power, rather than being wasted on resentment.
This leads to what we can enthusiastically call the Joan of Arc shift. When you are exiled by a flawed local authority, you don't beg them for readmission. Actually, scratch that. You bypass them entirely. You appeal directly to the highest court. You take that restricted energy and you let your own undeniable excellence become the ultimate victory over exile. You essentially build your own systems of grace.
And that leaves us with a really critical, provocative question to consider. Whether you view religion as divine truth, a historical operating system, or maybe a mix of both, the mechanics of power and grace remain exactly the same. Will you let a local, flawed human administrator restrict your inherent access rights to the root directory? Remember, your connection is ungate-loadable. You already have the master key to your own potential, so use it to build something extraordinary.